Today's lesson is eco-friendly fabric. Too good to be true? Hi everybody, I'm Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're going to continue talking about something called modal fabric. This kind of fabric or this kind of cloth comes from Japan. It was invented in Japan. And it's an eco-friendly option for people who are conscious about the environment. They're worried about making an impact on the environment. And of course, we've heard about fast fashion and all those clothes that end up in landfills. So yes, young people especially are concerned about using clothing that is good for the environment.
Yes, so specifically this type of fabric called modal is potentially very eco-friendly, and it can be used by people so that they don't damage the environment when they consume fashion. So we found out that modal is made from beech trees and that it has many advantages, among them being that it's stretchy, it's comfortable, and it doesn't wrinkle very easily. It's light, but it's also strong, and it doesn't lose color. So it seems like it's almost too good to be true, or maybe it is that great. But now we're going to find out whether there are any downsides to modal.
Right, we'll talk about some more advantages in today's program, but we'll also talk about some disadvantages as our lesson continues. So let's jump right into this. Let's listen to the first part of today's lesson, and then we'll be right back.
The claim that modal is eco-friendly is based on a few factors. First, relatively low levels of resources are required to make it. Producing modal, for example, uses 10 to 20 times less water than producing a similar amount of cotton. The beech trees can also be grown and harvested in a way that does not harm the environment. On the surface, then, modal seems like the ideal fabric. However, the reality is a little more complex.
The claim that modal is eco-friendly is based on a few factors. So, in other words, people have made claims that this type of fabric is eco-friendly, it doesn't harm the environment, but how did they arrive at this claim? Well, they arrived at this claim based on a few factors, a few reasons. First, relatively low levels of resources are required to make it.
Exactly. Okay, so that does sound like an advantage here. Fewer resources are required to make it. Low levels of resources are needed. Producing modal, for example, uses 10 to 20 times less water than producing a similar amount of cotton. So as you mentioned last time, Helen, if you want to produce cotton and you want to prepare the cotton for making cloth or fabric or material, you're going to have a lot of water. So a lot of water is wasted. But if you produce modal clothing, you don't need so much water. It uses 10 to 20 times less water than producing the same amount of cotton. That does sound like a great advantage.
Yes, and the beech trees can also be grown and harvested in a way that does not harm the environment. So that's another consideration, because sometimes we only think about the making of the fabric. We don't often think about the resources and the time and the conditions that go into making the material that is needed to make this fabric. And in this case, the material are beech trees, and beech trees, as we have just found out, can be grown easily, harvested easily, and it can be harvested in a way that doesn't damage the environment.
So it does sound too good to be true, and on the surface then, modal seems like the ideal fabric. However, the reality is a little more complex. So if something's on the surface, we're just looking at a few details and we're not really going into more depth about the particular subject, or in this case, the particular type of fabric. And that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to talk about some of the more complex factors involved with modal fabric, and then we're going to have to make some conclusions. Well, is it good or bad? Let's find out. Let's listen to the next part of our lesson, and we'll come right back.
While some companies that produce modal do so carefully and responsibly, others aren't so scrupulous. For example, instead of using sustainable beech wood, they use wood from rainforests, destroying important habitats. What's more, modal production involves many toxic chemicals that can be very harmful if leaked. Some companies take care not to let this happen, but others, particularly in countries where standards are lower, do not.
大家好，第二部分我们来介绍形容词 sustainable， 它的意思是永续的、可持续的。例如 Researchers are looking for a sustainable method of producing electricity. 研究人员正在寻找永续发电的方法。又或者说 Sustainable development aims to improve livelihoods while caring for the environment. 永续发展致力于在增进生计的同时也保护环境。另外补充这个字的动词 sustain S-U-S-T-A-I-N sustain 它指的是维持或是使继续。举例来说 The country's economy could not sustain rapid growth for long without triggering inflation. 那个国家维持经济长期快速发展就一定会造成通货膨胀。再举一个例子 You can sustain yourself on energy bars and nuts during our hike. 健行时你可以靠能量棒和坚果维持体力。下一个我们看到形容词 toxic， 意思是有毒的。例如 Investigators found toxic chemicals in the water. 调查人员在水中找到有毒的化学物质。或是 The factory released toxic fumes into the air. 那座工厂释放有毒烟雾到空气中。
So here is the first issue. While some companies that produce modal do so carefully and responsibly, others aren't so scrupulous. So some companies that produce modal are careful and they're responsible about their product being eco-friendly. So they produce this fabric in a way that doesn't harm the environment. But other companies aren't so scrupulous. So to be scrupulous means to be careful and to be honest in doing something, to care about being morally correct when you do something.
Right. It could also mean you pay attention to a lot of details, but nowadays, of course, it does talk about people who want to do the right thing. They don't want to do wrong. I could say my friend John is too scrupulous to work in business. If you work in business, of course, you need to learn how to smile as you kill. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. If you're too nice, you're just not going to get ahead. But in this particular case, other people who produce these kinds of clothing or this kind of clothing aren't so scrupulous. They're not so moral. They're not so ethical. For example, instead of using sustainable beechwood, they use wood from rainforests, destroying important habitats. Now, if we talk about something that is sustainable, that means we keep producing it over and over again, and we don't just destroy natural resources and then don't try to replace them. So we're always talking about, say, sustainable forms of energy like wind and solar, whereas using fossil fuels is not considered sustainable.
So the word sustainable can also be used to describe something that can be maintained for a long time. So unsustainable would mean it cannot be maintained for a long time. I could say that if I were to go on a diet and I ate very little every day, I could say that this diet is not sustainable because I can eat like this for only a few days or maybe a few weeks, but in the long run, it's not sustainable because I'm not eating enough and it might affect my health.
Right, and of course we've got some unscrupulous people who will use wood from rainforests, which of course is a forest in a tropical area, and this does happen a lot. People go in there and they just cut down the trees, like in Brazil, and they don't find ways to plant new trees. They just take the trees and they leave and go someplace else, and that is not sustainable. So those are some unscrupulous producers of the fabric. And yes, when they destroy those rainforests, they destroy important habitats. A habitat, of course, is where animals live, and if you destroy their home, well, they have no place to go, and they'll eventually all die out and go extinct.
Yes, and what's more, modal production involves many toxic chemicals that can be very harmful if leaked. So when we hear about modal, we think, well, it's a natural plant-based fabric. It's made from beech trees. But actually, toxic chemicals can go into the making of this type of fabric. Something that is toxic is poisonous, and it can be harmful to your health and harmful to the environment.
Right, so we've got toxic chemicals. That's similar in meaning to poisonous, but we do use the word poisonous to talk about things in the environment like poisonous plants. But in this particular case, we're talking about artificial ingredients, so they're toxic chemicals. and they can be very harmful to the environment if they're not handled properly. And some companies take care not to let this happen, but others, particularly in countries where standards are lower, do not. So yes, indeed, we do have some responsible companies. They take care. They're careful to not let this happen. But then we've got other companies that aren't so concerned about that. These would be companies in countries where they don't have great standards there. The government is either corrupt or they just don't care. So this could be third world countries that are trying to produce things, and they're probably destroying the environment in the process.
Right, and here the verb phrase take care simply means to be careful. You could say, take care not to break the vase when you're carrying it around. So it means be careful, and it's also used to say something to somebody when you want them to be well. You can say take care, but that has a different meaning.
It is often used as something we say when we say goodbye to somebody. Well, see you later. Take care. Hope everything goes well for you. But again, in this case, some companies are careful or they take care not to let this happen. Yes, indeed, some companies are responsible, but then some companies in other countries, or even in first world countries for that matter, if they can get away with it, they try to dump the chemicals into rivers and lakes, and that's not good. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's now listen to the third part, and we'll come right back to discuss it.
So though it's true that modal can be eco-friendly under the right circumstances, consumers still need to be careful. When buying clothes made of modal, make sure that the manufacturers have the proper environmental certifications. Otherwise, there's no guarantee that this eco-friendly fabric isn't actually harming the planet.
第三部分我们看到单字 circumstance， 它是名词，指的是情况、情形、形式，也可以是事件发生的情形或是详情。例如 Because of circumstances beyond our control, we have had to cancel our plans. 由于情形脱离掌控，我们必须取消我们的计划。又或者说 We should be prepared to adjust our schedule depending on the circumstances. 我们应该随时准备好，根据情形调整我们的行程。接下来我们看到名词 manufacturer， 指的是制造商。举例来说 The toy manufacturer sold a lot of products during the Christmas season. 这家玩具制造商在圣诞季节卖出很多产品。再举一个例子 Logan works for a manufacturer of leather products. Logan 为一间皮革制品制造商工作。另外补充这个字的动词 manufacture M-A-N-U-F-A-C-T-U-R-E manufacture， 它的意思是制造或是大量生产。例如 My uncle's factory manufactures hats. 我叔叔的工厂制造帽子。又或者说 The company's products were manufactured in India because it was cheaper. 那家公司的产品是在印度制造，因为比较便宜。最后我们看到单字 certification， 它是名词，指的是证明、证书或是认证。例如 Alice got her certification to teach math at the high school level. Alice 拿到了能够教高中程度数学的证明。又或者说 The students received certifications when they completed life-saving training. 学生们在救生训练结束后得到了证书。
So though it's true that modal can be eco-friendly under the right circumstances, consumers still need to be careful. So as we have seen before, modal can be very eco-friendly, but depending on the company that makes it, it can also be not eco-friendly because companies may use a lot of toxic chemicals that end up dumped in the environment, and companies can also use wood from rainforests to make the fabric. So it can be eco-friendly under the right circumstances. Circumstance here refers to conditions, so it can be eco-friendly under the right conditions. And these conditions affect a situation, affect the outcome of the fabric and how eco-friendly it can be.
Right, and of course, in this particular usage, circumstances is usually in the plural. A circumstance can be used in the singular form. For example, we have the phrase, a victim of circumstance, which means something bad happened to you, but it wasn't your fault. You were just involved in different situations that were beyond your control, and you suffered as a result of that. Help me, I'm a victim of circumstance. But here, circumstances is used in the plural. Consumers still need to be careful, even though some companies are eco-friendly in the right circumstances. If they are in a country that, enforces the laws and things like that and don't take bribes from people, then modal fabric can be good for the environment.
Right. So when buying clothes made of modal, make sure that the manufacturers have the proper environmental certifications. Seeing that there are so many things to consider when you buy modal, you really need to be careful. And when you do buy clothing made of this fabric, make sure that the manufacturers or the company or the people that manufacture, that produce this fabric or these clothes have the proper environmental certifications. A certification is a document or something official that shows that something has been achieved, that a status has been earned.
Right, and this word manufacturer is kind of difficult to say, so let me say it slowly so you can practice it. Manufacturer. Of course, those are companies that produce things, factories, etc. They manufacture things, they produce things. And yes, indeed, they do need to have the proper environmental certifications like licenses and permission from the government and things like that. Otherwise, there's no guarantee that this eco-friendly fabric isn't actually harming the planet. So otherwise is used to introduce a situation that is opposite to what we were talking about, or it's the result of something. If you don't do this, something's going to happen to you, or you're going to suffer some kind of negative consequence. You could say, hurry, let's go, otherwise we'll be late. If we don't hurry, then therefore we will be late.
Right. Or your mother could say to you, you better clean your room, otherwise I'm not going to let you play video games later. So it can also be used as a kind of subtle threat.
Indeed. Okay, so if we don't have the proper environmental certifications, therefore these companies will probably pollute the environment and modal fabric won't be so good for the environment after all. And there's no guarantee that this fabric will not harm the planet. So here what guarantee just means to make sure that something is going to happen. We see the word guarantee most often when we buy products. This product is guaranteed. If it doesn't work for you, if you're not satisfied, then you can return the product for a full refund.
Right. Guarantee can also be used as another word for promise. So instead of saying, I promise you that you're going to love this restaurant that I'm going to take you to tonight, you could also say, I guarantee that you will love the restaurant that I will take you to tonight.
So we just don't know if this eco-friendly fabric is going to be good or bad for the world, for the earth. But in any case, as consumers, we can, do our research and find out if the companies producing this kind of fabric are on the up and up, if they're responsible. And if we find out that the companies are legitimate, then we can buy those pieces of clothing and we can be happy. And I'm sure they're producing some really fashionable items, especially because this fabric comes from Japan. And Japan, my goodness, they produce some really chic kinds of clothing, don't they?
Yes, they do. They're always on the forefront of fashion technology. They've made a lot of different types of clothing using the most innovative fabric made not only from plants, but also from other types of materials.
Indeed. So is it good or bad? It's up to you to decide. But hey, I wonder where we can buy some modal fabric and what kinds of clothing items they offer and whether or not they're expensive or not. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's turn things over now to Hanny, our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分有一个句子写到，生产相同数量的莫代尔布料比棉花所需的用水量要少10到20倍。文中是用10 to 20 times less water than 点点点来表达比什么什么少10到20倍的水。好，那这边我们就来学习倍数的表示法。倍数的说法是数字加上 times， 像 3 times 3倍 10 times 10倍等等。那一半的话我们是用 half， 2倍的话我们是用 2 times 或者是 twice 来表达。那么常见的倍数表示方法有以下3种。第一种呢是倍数加上比较级加上 than 点点点，或者是倍数加比较级加名词加 than 点点点。举例来说 The city's population is 4 times larger than Taipei's。 那个城市的人口数是台北的4倍。好，那要特别注意 half 和 twice 一般不会用在这个比较级加 than 的句型里面。我们要表达2倍的话会用 2 times 比较级 than 点点点。好，再来看到第二个表示方法是倍数加上 as 形容词 as 或是 as 副词 as， 或者是呢倍数加上 as 形容词名词 as 点点点。举例来说 The dog is 3 times as heavy as our cat。 那只狗的体重是我们猫咪的3倍。好，再看到第3个表示法是倍数加上 the 加名词计量词 of 点点点。好，英文里面常见的名词计量词有包括 size, length, age, number, weight, height 等等。举例来说 Their new apartment is twice the size of their old one。 他们的新公寓是旧公寓的2倍大。那这个用法呢，有时候也会看到另外一个句型是倍数加上 once 加上名词计量词。举例来说 His son is about half his height。 他儿子的身高大约是他的一半，所以我们用 half his height 来表达他身高的一半。好，再来接着读到课文第3部分，有一句提醒我们说，当购买莫代尔布料制成的衣物时，需要确保制造商具有适当的环保证明。文中是用 make sure that the manufacturers have 点点点来表达说确保制造商具有点点点点点。那这边我们要补充的是 make sure 的相关用法。第一个呢是指确保务必，那么后面可以接 that 子句，就像课文的用法，这个 that 也可以省略。那另外 make sure 后面也可以接不定词 to v， 像 make sure to back up your work before you log off， 登出之前务必要把工作资料备份哦。好，在第二个用法我们可以用 make sure 表达确认、查明或是弄清楚，后面可以接 of 加名词，或者是也可以接 that 子句，那一样 that 可以省略。例如I just called to make sure that you were all right， 或者是 I just called to make sure you were all right， 我只是打电话来确认你没事。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Sustainable. Using public transportation is a more sustainable option than driving alone in a car. Toxic. Exposure to toxic chemicals can have serious health effects. Circumstance. The circumstances that led to the incident are still unclear and require further investigation. Manufacturer. The manufacturer offered a replacement for the damaged product. Otherwise. I really need to study tonight. Otherwise, I won't pass my math test. Guarantee. Wearing a seatbelt is no guarantee that you'll avoid injury in a car accident, but it certainly reduces your risk.
Discussion starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, based on the article, will you seek to buy clothes made of modal fabric in the future? Why or why not?
Well, I think I won't seek to buy clothes made of modal in the future, given that you really need to do a lot of research to decide whether a particular brand is eco-friendly or not. And I don't think I have time to do all that research. So I'm just going to stick to not buying a lot of things and wear what I already have and be happy with that.
Okay, well, I will try to buy clothes made of modal in the future since lots of clothing companies will probably start to offer items for sale in their stores. And I'm hoping that they'll have my size because, my goodness, I'm a big fella compared to most people here in Taiwan. I need to wear like size XXL or something like that. And I doubt I'm going to find that size in modal clothing here. I'll probably have to order it online.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Helen.
I am Roger.
See you next time.